Welcome to Pharaoh, a strategy city-building game set in ancient Egypt, developed by Impressions Games and published by Sierra. Released in October 1999, it garnered much critical success and top positions in the sales charts like its immediate precursor, Caesar 3. Yep, it's the fourth installment of a series unhelpfully called the City Building series, whose main features including taking the role of a governor, uncannily building a city on an isometric 2D map in an ancient setting, constructing residential areas, and then proceeding to set up industries, trade, military, religious, and public amenities around them, providing goods and services to the public through roaming bazaar workers, firemen, and priests, all until the cheeky citizens go fat and lazy. They forsake you, they realize the city is starting to cramp their style, and ultimately decide to go step out of it, leaving you with your angry king's army at your doorstep, because hey, you've been in debt for the last 10 years, and there is a pole yearning for your head on top of it in the capital. Pharaoh is the first game in its series not to be set in ancient Rome. It comes with an accurate in-game encyclopedia, colossal monuments, and a mostly historical timeline covering all of the country's important historical periods, from the humble pre-dynastic beginnings to the Cleopatra-scale mischief of the Ptolemaic dynasty. To my eyes, all of this makes Pharaoh the first really good and polished city-building game, one you can seriously think of coming back to 2 decades past its release, and enjoy it for what it has to offer. Or maybe not. The first thing you notice as you dart past the starting screens are the succulent 2D graphics of a late 90s hit. Immerse yourself in the tan and ivory beauty of Pharaoh. Go ahead, it'll be our secret. Royal orgy innuendo aside, do you see how deliciously stylish this game is? It's neat without losing color. It's cute, but not all ponies and rainbows. Pharaoh makes you want to build your cities as dense as you can because of how your eyes groan with elation when it all comes together. Sprite upon sprite of sheer beauty, and there's not a single square of empty land left. Exquisite carved stone buttons and totally adorable miniature stacks of resources. And every house you get to see, rich or poor, is eminently touchable. You almost want to try and bite them to see if they're crunchy. Temples and palaces, mines and floodplain farms. This visual bombardment is coming from everywhere, leaving you with no choice but to give in to that visceral enjoyment as you play. Alright, crude hearts look like somebody piled them up using spit and recycled notebook paper. They're positively disgusting. Anyway, I think the visuals are one of the reasons Pharaoh is such an absorbing and meditative game. You plop a few buildings and you take a metaphorical step back to simply look at them and feed your eyes a little more. Not that there aren't any flies in this otherwise rich graphical consomme. The cutscenes might have looked okay back in the day, but the low-resolution textures and the overly pompous cinematography aren't cutting it anymore by far, and the animated walker figures have that unpleasant sheen of pre-rendered 90s 3D model sprites. They're certainly a head and shoulders above the disembodied factories of Caesar 3, and while they are a match for their surroundings, they're not a perfect one. Contrary to first impressions, this game is not all about simulating slave labor camps for building giant triangulates. You're gonna build cities. Cities meaning people. People meaning sentient clones parthenogenetically spawned by the desert and wandering mindlessly into your settlement, bringing thousands of butts to be wiped and tastes to be pampered.
I'm new here. I wonder what the city will offer to a person like me.
With 20 levels of residential housing to go around, from desperately destitute to oysters on your scrotum rich, you will inevitably get onto the treadmill of catering to all of your citizens' whims who make a blazing ascent from, Sir, may I have a sip of water, sir? To demanding game meat and fish, in addition to the lettuce and farty chickpeas that every pleb eats all the time anyway. Or else you meet this lovely fellow.
I've been kicked out of my home, and through no fault of my own.
Whatever the case may be, you know that seeing these people grow into something worthwhile is one of the juiciest cuts of this game's meat. So you grab into your coffers and you send the waterman around, and you set up temples and bazaars, and you roll out red tape and the courts, tankards and the Senate House and dead bodies in the mortuary. You work hard and you finally get to see them. The impressively thick-walled palatial estates, which takes place a second before you realize that your workforce has been cut in half and there's no one to man the utilities with fire and pestilence everywhere. No farmers to make food, no child laborers to bring food to the market, and guess what? Plenty of...
I've been kicked out of my home and through no fault of my own.
Yeah, Pharaoh tends to punch you in the nuts like that. What? Isn't it obvious that the shitbags in the palaces just won't bust their bottoms 9 to 5? Oh, and if they do devolve at some point back into the working class, they'll kick that unemployment far into the double digits overnight, and their newfangled little shacks will be a bit too far from the street to receive any services. So, is it...
I've been kicked out of my home.
But this is just one facet of the big management puzzle of Pharaoh. An experienced player immediately figures a few important things out when faced with a new scenario. What kinds of raw materials you have available? What industries? What kinds of trade routes you've been given? Is there anything basic that you'll have to import, like pottery? Can you mine or produce really expensive goods really quick and dump them on your neighbors? What is the top level of housing you can reasonably achieve? You answer these questions and you've got yourself a strategy for the mission. And it's only then that you start adapting your idea to the quirks of the map, seeking to prevent delivery men from spending too much time en route, to find places for docks that actually work, to get the gears of this whole system rolling. See, building really good residential neighborhoods is easy. You just set up a looped road, drop the houses around it, plop the agony booths, the roadblocks at the exits to keep the walkers in, and leave space for future public services, building them up as you need them. Now, getting your industries and trade to work for your city without running its treasury dry is the actual challenge, starting from the right placement of your workshops, warehouses, and utilities to various schemes involving your workforce, your tax income, the amount of goods you can import and export, as well as what the actual mission expects you to do. Here's an example. It's rarely worth your while to build up industries whose raw materials you have to import and whose products you only export, because there's usually stuff with better margins. But if you've grown a lot, if your other, more lucrative industries have mostly been covered, and perhaps you need to tackle high unemployment, so you go ahead and buy the raw materials and build the workshop, and then you cut the unemployment and get those satisfaction rates and tax income up, in addition to a little trade. See the kind of thinking this game generates? You feel like a social engineer surreptitiously nudging your subjects towards whatever vision you have of them, all for that debonair account to soar into 6 digits. Well, you can obviously destroy a bunch of houses and take care of the unemployed downers that way. Accountability, you say? Charming.
More beer and lettuce, please. Chop, chop.
Speaking of nudging and taking care of stuff, let me push you headfirst into the memory well and point out that I'd tried SimCity 3000 by the time I got my hands on Pharaoh back around 2000, and SimCity failed to appeal to me back then for all the zoning and abstract, albeit more realistic and direct city planning. Little despotic twat that I was, demanding all buildings be plopped at a whim, which Pharaoh delivered so generously, providing enough room for that digital dictator muscle to flex and grow. You do get absolute power over your city.
But wait, if you do it before the next equinox, you will get another shipment of burial provisions, a set of canopic jars, and unbelievably, the finely carved pyramid text absolutely free. Share a cruise with the gods, keep your glands safe, and leave stories of your naked antics for posterity. Remember, royal concubines love precious stones, especially if laid out in pure geometric shapes of inhuman proportions. Don't you agree, ladies?
I have to admit, this aspect of the game is very sneaky in that it takes you a long time, and probably much of the game's campaign to grow to dislike it. It's very much an acquired taste. You may be a petty dictator all you want, but that feeling of getting your citizens a little less unwashed and slightly more cultured is a pleasant one. You want to plop schools and libraries for better education. You want to get them more entertainment with all the jugglers and loud musical acts right across the road. And you want to provide provide them with dentists. Because the hip Nileside crowd simply won't leave the house without their golden teeth in. The problem lies in mission goals, specifically in the culture rating that virtually every mission requires you to achieve. Unlike Caesar 4, for example, it is calculated not on the basis of how many houses you actually cover with those services, in other words, how efficiently you plan and lay out your city, but using a predefined formula whereby for every X citizens you have to build Y juggler stages, or zoos, or freaking scribal schools. And you never reasonably need that many for any city to function, so if you have to achieve a high culture rating, you have to plop those bandstands wherever you can, or even make entire fields of jugglers far out in the desert, making hyenas a little bit happier. Let's talk about religion. In Pharaoh,
Ladies and
Tax collectors.
let me present to you the colourful, majestic gods of Egypt, with a man propping his chin with chin-propping appendages, cat lady with a human costume missing a head, giant throne with hand-shaped armrests, earless gimp mutant with a whip, and the cute little birdie boo. Sad to say, they all belong to the same cult of the reload button. While most of their gifts are rather modest and are largely pissing in the wind for a well-oiled city, their punishments leave you hoping the last autosave is not from immediately before the sky monster in question gets a mild case of the SADS. Past sends plagues that kill off your population and eventually, literally, burn down your economy because there's nobody to man the firehouses. Ptah, also a Klingon spy, will happily send a helping of fireballs to your storage yards and destroy your stocks of weaponry right before an invasion. Osiris, bad flood, destroyed farms, no food, housing goes down, half your pops emigrate, you're ruined. Have a nice eternity in hell, dear mayor. Worse, building temples and shrines generally only appeases and quells the tantrums of the celestial dimple turds. If you want their benevolence, especially the very useful construction blessing, which speeds up the erection of your monuments, be a darling and do regular festivals dedicated to the gods. And add about 5 clicks to your UI overhead every 4 in-game months, which translates into every bloody 3 seconds at maximum game speed. Because hey, the Great Pyramid is only 40% done and you really want to squeeze another mission in tonight before feeding your cat and going to bed. So let's talk about those things too. Wait, where were we? Who cares? It's Egypt, and it's Pharaoh! You get to build pyramids and feel like you actually built them. One pile after another, layer after layer of limestone, plain stone, sand... Anyway, a game that has 4 types of stone in it, plus bricks, send you a clear message. Future alien conspiracy theorists need stuff to base their nutter-fondling careers on, so you'd better get those 2.5-ton blocks moving. 4,000 years aren't gonna last forever. By the way, did you know that the game's plain stone is actually limestone too? It's found naturally in the Great Pyramids area, and it's a good material for construction, but it's too porous and doesn't look too good. So they had to import denser limestone for that smooth and shiny outer layer of blocks. Back to the monuments in the game. I've got somewhat conflicting feelings about them. On the one hand, they are the crown jewel of Pharaoh. They clearly were intended as its main attraction. Let's face it, most people only care about ancient Egypt because of the blowhard depiction of the primordial mound. And mounds the game does indeed deliver. Well researched too. We're supposed to know what a bloody mastaba was before you played the game? I sure didn't. Or did you know that the really big all-stone pyramids are some of the most ancient ones too? Later pyramids from the Middle Kingdom cheapened out with bricks and rubble inside instead of stone and are now disappearing because of theft and erosion. You find all of that in Pharaoh by actually delivering those materials to the construction sites. Do I even need to mention the genuine pride and satisfaction you feel after completing something as big as that? On the other hand, should I also mention the feeling of relief from all the frustration of waiting for the sodding pile of rock to be finally done and over with? The monument building mechanism that the game uses has ginormous potential for prolonging scenarios from just over what you would consider comfortably to near infinity. This is made worse if you have to import resources by trade, which is always limited, meaning that the scenario designers effectively set a timer, making you play in that map for at least X hours and Y minutes. And you can see in later games that they knew
knew about the problem keeping the monuments, but toning their epic insanity down a notch. Cause Pharaoh's approach to them is annoying even if you're an experienced player who knows how things work in it. For a newbie, it's game-breaking. You just sit and stare at the idle workers standing in the middle of a semi-finished small pyramid, and you hope they start staring back at you, and maybe help things get running again. That's old-school game design for you. And speaking of design... I've just realized I'm getting too hard on the poor Pharaoh. Oh, let's cheer the divine autocrat up a little. Is there a feature that's undeniably special to city-building games? Walker system, you say?
Bollocks, more like smack Osiris!
The further I progressed into the main campaign and the bigger my cities became, the more I saw how flawed the idea of walkers, dudes wandering about and offering services, is, at least in the form it takes in Pharaoh and its immediate successors. We can play devil's advocate and say that walkers certainly spare the player a lot of micromanagement. Imagine having to press a button on every house to prevent it from catching a fire every 6 in-game months, and then look at the humble firehouse chap walking about and doing all of that for you. And it all works fantastically in the perfect microcosm of a looped neighborhood. But once it comes to building a huge industrial district crammed into the bank of the Nile, as close to the docks and clay pits as possible, where many trade and production chains overlap and every bit of land is valuable, you see the whole mechanism fraying at the edges. Because you cannot control your workers or predict the paths they take. Whenever you put them into a dense area with inevitable intersections, fires will burn, storage yards will collapse right in front of engineers' noses, and businesses will sit without employees. And all you can do is reload and plop firehouses everywhere and set up shanty towns next to factories so that the bloody recruiters can find the workers.
I'm the most popular person in the city.
Pharaoh does one of the worst crimes a game can do to a player, and it's taking away control. Remember the last time you had to sit through interminable cutscenes or just mashed buttons because the combat system is too fast, too complex, too random at the same time? Or beat your head against a tough dexterity-based level in an otherwise non-dexterity game? Frustrating to even think about this, isn't it? That's game stealing control, and in a more subtle way, that's what Pharaoh does with walkers.
Alright, you grumbling Gomer, how do you propose we make it better?
Simple. Add more clarity and viable options. For one, being able to see what paths the walker will take when you plot the building would be a huge boost. A tool to actually plot specific routes for the walker to take if really necessary would be perfect. I mean, it's not something unheard of in city builders. Look at city skylines where you can very enjoyably set up routes for public transport. How is this conceptually different? Also, why not be able to toggle between walkers for long or weirdly configured neighborhoods and an area of effect around the building providing the service within a certain radius for messy and dense industrial areas? Not only would these fixes alleviate some of the game's frustrations, they would add cool new approaches to building your cities. I mean, why am I referring to looped neighborhoods so much? Because it's effectively the only good way to plan residential areas if you're looking for anything other than shacks. Loops are strong, but unfortunately loops are also tedious. Ironically, since the introduction of walkers in Caesar 2, the city building series added more and more things to curb their unpredictability. Pharaoh added roadblocks to turn walkers back. Zeus and Emperor eliminated recruiter walkers and changed their entertainment infrastructure to make it work better in looped neighborhoods, and Caesar 4, well, it largely dropped the entire stupid idea of walkers altogether. And it does feel a bit stupid, doesn't it? What's the point of a bazaar if all the food is delivered to your home? Let me just say it outright. Walkers are a mid to late 90s strategy game gimmick. Settlers, knights and merchants, cultures, stronghold.
Look, we've got little people sprites trundling about, and you know what? They do stuff on their own. Mind's blown. Skynet and Matrix round the corner, man.
And as those other games show, the gimmick isn't horrible per se. It's just that Pharaoh's implementation of it kinda stinks. But hey, chins up. It ain't the worst smell this game has to offer. Ancient Egypt was not a peaceful place, and many invaders tried to and actually grabbed the many riches of this land. Nubians, Libyans, Palestinians, Hyksos, Sea People, Romans, Arabs, Napoleons, which makes a military component necessary for any pretense of authenticity. And there is one in this game. In fact, in all of the city-building series of games. Now, do I even need to spell out what a boundless chasm of arse it is in all of them? On the surface, it's all fine. You raise an army to defend your city, to serve the Pharaoh in his campaigns, and to save Egypt's cities clamoring for help. Reasonable? Yep. Thematic? You bet. Those chariots are cracking. But fun? Yeah. Let's be frank, soldiers are just another resource for the game. Walking barrels of beer with spears tied to them. You buy some copper, you make it into weapons, you convert weapons into soldiers, and let them trickle into their own special storage yard called the infantry fort. Oh sure, there's a good bit of cheek puffing, ooh, battle formations, hold ground and attack at world orders. What a crock of shite. These guys will quantum collapse into a single sprite as soon as they touch the enemy, and all these buttons become as tactical as a redneck taping a bayonet onto his airsoft bazooka. Go figure their position out in the orthogonal unidimensional space they've just fallen into. I have no width, and I must cry. And even moving your troops around the map is a pain. There's no selection box function, and the click detection on the enemies expects nothing short of perfection. You've got to click the enemy dudes right in his belly to send your troops to kill him, and if you miss, the gormless twats will just go there, stand still, and gradually turn into mincemeat under enemy attacks. And there are no management challenges either. You don't have to feed your soldiers or spend resources for them to go on campaigns. They're there for you to respond to military events. Forget about exploration and conquest. They're there so that you can press a button on the military advisor screen and not lose your kingdom rating. Thankfully, the sequels, Zeus and Emperor, allow you to go out and flex that imperialist muscle and then squeeze the other cities for tribute. But back to the battles themselves. Why do all these games have this incredibly lame and frustrating real-time strategy element to begin with? It's completely alien to the whole city-building bit, and I've already talked about how games take away control by suddenly expecting a completely different skill set, which in this case is fast-paced, high-precision clicking to make your units do what you want, all in a game that's otherwise about slow construction and resource management. Why not have a turn-based mode for battles on a separate wargame-style randomly generated board, where you can calmly arrange your troops, play around with the different abilities and bonuses different troop classes have? That's resource management for you, and even use the bloody formations. This would even affect your city building strategy, because you could plan your city and industries around certain unit classes and combinations that work well in military scenarios, and not what you actually do in Pharaoh. Build only what you have money and resources for, otherwise plop random forts, which works most of the time. And it's not like there weren't good examples of games divorcing strategy and resource management from battles at the time. The Heroes of Might and Magic series had been out for half a decade, and look at all the RPG adventure games where you faff about in real time and switch to a highly structured mode for combat, like Final Fantasy or I don't know, Gorky 17. But Pharaoh, the entire city building series tried to become Total War before it even existed, and fell flat so hard it broke an innocent pyramid and made a hippo cry. In short, the military is the absolute worst that Pharaoh has to offer, and if you are new to the game or returning after long separation, do yourself a favor and avoid battle-focused scenarios when given a choice, as well as the Ramesses II and Sea People modules in the Cleopatra expansion. Or if you've been feeling bloodthirsty lately, just go play as Egyptians and roam Total War. Right, I'm giving suggestions already, so it's about time we scampered towards the exit. So, does Pharaoh hold its own over 2 decades past its release date? Should you take a peek if you're new to city-building games? Or Pharaoh is an old flame, have you found yourself in the mood for a date long overdue? Oh, absolutely. A hit back then, it doesn't fail in being enchanting, engrossing, and enjoyable today. It's readily available for purchase of different platforms and still has a decent following. Pharaoh is fittingly timeless, though I can only recommend it with a few reservations. First, assuming you're not stuck in 2007, get a widescreen mod. There are a few of those, and I've put the good one I use in the description. The global map looks a little dodgy, but it's worked flawlessly so far. Second, let me repeat myself in telling you to avoid everything military that isn't forced on you. While battle-oriented scenarios can offer a good change of pace, I don't think they're worth the headache grappling with shabby warfare mechanics. Third, don't try to gobble it all up in one go. There's a solid 70 hours of gameplay sitting in the campaigns of Pharaoh and Cleopatra, and I short-sightedly crammed my retro rubbish relapse playthrough of everything into just a couple of weeks. And now I fantasize about how cool it'd be to drop a tactical nuke onto a pyramid to make a huge crater where its tip used to be, just so that you can call it a volcano. It does get repetitive and will drive you bonkers at high doses, so set up a roadblock, children, and never inundate and drive. And finally, if you're new to the series, you might want to take a look at the lesser-known city-building games that came after Pharaoh. Zeus and Emperor run much more polished versions of the same systems, set in ancient Greece and China respectively, although this is the topic for a follow-up video coming soon, in which I rank and discuss all 8 games of the series from Caesar 1 to Children of the Nile. So if you don't want to miss it, don't you dare linger, outstretch that finger, become a subscriber, let's be complicit.
In all the future retro rubbish relapse videos, let's smack our heads full of turn-of-the-century games, shall we? Which ones? Cheers.